Way back in episode 163, we spoke about our favourite UK bands and artists and vocabulary such as groundbreaking, lead the way, cutting edge, to innovate, trend-setting and trailblazing. In today's podcast, we compare our favourite and most influential American music bands and artists, and you'll learn expressions for giving opinions in English. Welcome to
Aprender Inglés with Reza and Craig.
Hi, my name's Reza.
And I'm Craig.
And with more than 60 years of teaching between us, we are here to help you improve your English and take it to the next level. So, Craig, how are you doing? How are you feeling?
I'm feeling fantastic. Really excited to be podcasting with you on this episode of music. It's been a while since we've spoken about music. We've had a request from a listener, and we did promise way back in episode 163 that we would look at American music. So, really excited to get into it with you. But before that, let's listen to a voice message we've received, a voice message of thanks from someone called Joms.
I am sending this message to you because I would like to give you my thanks because I visit the page mentionenglish.com frequently. I'm studying English and I have improved my skills a lot. So I wish the best to you and your team, and I hope to send an email with my feedback and just thank you very much. These have been so useful to me and for many people, I think. So have a good year, 2025, and see you soon. See you soon, man.
Well, thank you very much, Joms, and Happy New Year and Happy 2025 to you. And I really appreciate your good wishes and thanks for the Mansion Inglés website. We don't actually have a team of people, I wish we did, over at mansioningles.com. It's just myself and my good friend and business partner, Luis. And we've been putting material for Spanish speakers on the website since 2001. So for a very, very long time. And I'm happy that it's helped you, Joms, to improve your English. If you'd like to go over and have a look, there's lots of material on the website. It's mansioningles.com. And you're also welcome to consider signing up for the newsletter that's published every month. So thanks again, Joms.
Yes, thank you, Joms. I would say that we kind of do have an established team for the podcast. The team for the podcast is Craig, me, and then there is always a nice cup of coffee and a very nice piece of pastry or a good chocolate biscuit. They're a fixed part of the team, don't you think?
Yeah, I think of our team as the listeners. The listeners send in voice messages like Joms, and in a second we've got another message from Carmen. So I think of our extended team as you out there listening to us every week and coming back because you find value for your English. Speaking of Carmen, let's listen to what she says. Carmen has been in touch quite a lot recently. She's from, I can't remember if it's Huelva or Malaga. I think she's in Malaga at the moment. Sorry, Carmen, can't remember where you're from or where you are. But here's what Carmen says this week.
Hi, Craig. Hi, Reza. How are you doing? I'm Carmen. I don't know if you remember me, but some months ago, I sent you an audio about Thanksgiving Day. Well, today I'm sending you this audio just because I wanted to tell you that I attended last Saturday an event about how to build your own brand identity. It was in English, and I must say that I understood almost everything except one word, and the word was leverage. Could you explain the meaning of this word to me, please? Thank you. Have a nice week. Bye.
Well, thank you, Carmen, for your comments. And when Carmen commented on the word leverage, I thought she'd mispronounced it. So I sent a message back to Carmen and said, no, you don't pronounce it leverage, you pronounce it leverage. Well, I was wrong because Carmen checked it and this is what she says.
Hi, Greg. Thank you for replying so quickly. The thing is that before sending you my audio, I checked the pronunciation on web reference. And if you click on the pronunciation with the British pronunciation, look, I'm going to click on it.
Leverage.
It says leverage. And if you click on American pronunciation,
leverage,
says leverage.
So I actually thought mistakenly that the American pronunciation was the correct one because I just thought it was leverage, which is the way the American say it, American English speakers. Although apparently, and you're absolutely correct, Carmen, you can also pronounce it leverage, which is more British English. So not only was I wrong, but I also thought it was the American pronunciation. So how would you say it, Reza?
I actually favor the American pronunciation myself. I would say leverage, but I've heard people say leverage, but I prefer leverage myself.
So the same as me then. Yeah. Okay. Well, what does it mean? Well, lever is something that helps you to move something else. If you have a lever, it's maybe a handle that you pull to set something in motion, or you can lever a rock or a stone out of position by using a piece of wood or an iron, long iron bar to move it. So that's what a lever is. But what's leverage in the use that Carmen probably means it in a conference about brand image?
Well, if you think about it, so if you had a lever, if you had something and you put it into a closed door to try to open it, you'd be trying to get access. You would be trying to open up that door. So when it's used in the abstract way, it means getting access to something to be able to influence. If you have leverage, you have a way of getting inside to influence or have access to something. That's leverage in the abstract way.
And you often use it with information, don't you? If you have information about someone and you want them to do something for you, you could use the information as leverage to get them to do what you want. So as an incentive.
For example, there's a very, very widespread rumor, which may or may not be true on internet, that the Russian state has certain video footage of Donald J. Trump doing things that he wouldn't be proud to admit that he was doing in a hotel in Russia, and that they've been using it as leverage. The Ukrainians speak openly about it. They're fairly sure of it. They even have a word for it in Russian. I forgot, but it's something like kompromot or something like that.
Yeah, kompromot.
Yeah. You're compromised. That's their leverage. Because have you noticed that Donald J. Trump is very, very soft on Vladimir Putin compared to most leaders? Now, why is that? There's a theory that they have leverage. It's like, well, you could criticize me if you want, Donald, but we do have this video of you which you don't want everyone to see. Have you heard that theory?
I've heard that word because I'm watching a very good TV series called The Recruit on Netflix, and they use that word kompromot quite a lot as leverage or information, which is very, very valuable in order to get what you want out of someone. Very interesting. So Carmen has also been in touch, and she has requested a podcast about music. Although we have spoken about music before, haven't we? So people who are interested, where can they go, Reza?
Well, the first time we really spoke about music was way back in episode 163. There's a link in the show notes, but it's very easy. You just write inglespodcast.com/ and then the number of the episode, 163, and that will take you straight there. And Craig, we've also spoken about legends from the UK. Can you remember what episode that was?
Yes, that was 175. So inglespodcast.com/175. We spoke about our favourite music bands from the UK. So artists and bands that originated or were born in the United Kingdom. And when we recorded that episode, we did say that we were going to do a similar podcast about American music. And to be clear, when we say American, we're talking about artists and bands that come from or were born in the United States of America. So not Latin America or South America, but in the USA.
I must say, if you want to write a song, and the British version of this song wouldn't work with it. If you wanted to write a song like "Born in the USA, I was born in the US," etc. What about "I was born in the UK"? It doesn't have the same ring, does it? It doesn't work. It doesn't work as well, that song, does it?
Born in Leighton Buzzards and born
in the county of Essex. I was born in Northern Ireland. It doesn't quite work. No, we'll stick with Bruce Springsteen for that one.
I was born in Belfast. No, it doesn't work. But what is quite useful, I think, when you're talking about music or anything that you like, is to express your opinion and give your opinion. Now, when you're taking an English exam, like a Cambridge C1 or B2 exam, it's a very good idea to vary and use different expressions when you're giving your opinion. And that's one reason why we're going to list some expressions here that you can use. However, I don't know if you agree, Reza, but native speakers, generally speaking, in casual, informal conversations, we probably wouldn't use such a wide variety of expressions when we give our opinion, would we?
That's true. We wouldn't use such a wide expression, really, but, we wouldn't use such a wide variety of expressions, but we could use any one of them. That's the thing. So we probably don't use a variety, but we don't always keep using the same one. So one day I might say to you one thing and another day another, whereas the problem with foreign speakers is they tend to repeat things like, I think, or in my opinion. I think, blah, blah, blah. In my opinion, blah, blah, blah. I think, blah, blah, blah. In my opinion, I think, in my opinion. And it gets very boring, always hearing the same expression day in, day out from the same person.
Yeah, and especially in an exam where the examiner doesn't know you, you want to show that you do have a wide command of the language and that you do know more expressions than just, in my opinion. So here are a few that we will be using, hopefully, during the podcast to express our opinion, and also that maybe you want to write down and use when you're speaking English. If you want to see these expressions written, just go to the show notes at inglespodcast.com/559. Now, I said that in my opinion is quite common. That's fine. You can use that. In my opinion, blah, blah, blah. You can also moderate your opinion by using some words like honest, in my honest opinion, or considered, in my considered opinion, blah, blah, blah. Or if you want to be really modest and humble, you could say, in my humble opinion. In my humble opinion, Reza is the best podcaster in the world.
Or very often these days, people say, in my humble opinion, but they're not really being humble at all.
No, it's the opposite.
It's just one of those things you say, but you don't really mean it.
Other expressions you could use, the way I see it. The way I see it. And very often when we're giving our opinion, we tend to stress the pronoun. So the pronoun here is I, and it's very common to hear the way I see it, blah, blah, blah. So in my opinion, you're stressing the pronoun, which is unusual. Pronouns are not usually stressed, but because it's your opinion, then you would stress the I or the my pronoun in these expressions.
Another one, and again, we tend to stress the pronoun, is as far as I'm concerned. So stressing the word I'm, as far as I'm concerned. And another one, this time with an object pronoun, for me. Do you notice how I say the word for? I don't really say for. When I speak quickly, I say, for me, chocolate biscuits are far better than custard creams. For me. So the word for sounds like for me.
That's a very short expression. That's one I would probably use quite often. For me, chocolate cake is the best cake you could have for dessert. Another one, to my mind. 3 words, to my mind, but I'm stressing the my. To my mind, blah, blah, blah.
Another one, stressing the personal word, the in my view. So that's similar to my mind, but get your prepositions right. To my mind, but in my view. The first expression had the preposition to, but the second expression has the preposition in my view.
And the next one has a different preposition. It's from my point of view. From my point of view. So that word view again, Reza's example was in my view, and my example from my point of view.
Another one is I reckon. Reckon is basically a slightly more informal word for I think or I believe.
Quite British as well, isn't it?
Quite British, I think, yeah.
So you can say I reckon that, or I think that, or I believe that, which is a little more formal. I believe that.
You could also begin, if you ask me, and then give your opinion. If you ask me, chocolate brownies are more enjoyable than chocolate muffins.
I reckon that you're absolutely correct. Personally, I feel that. So instead of saying I believe, you can feel something, which is also expressing your opinion. I feel that. Personally, I feel that chocolate biscuits are the best.
So remember, listeners, that we always stress either the word I or my. Yeah, I feel, in my opinion, the way I see it. If you ask me, those are the words that get stressed. The I, the my, the me.
So we'll try to use some of these expressions as we are giving our opinion on American music. And I asked Reza to write down his top 10 of music that he likes, but also music that he thinks has been more influential in the American music scene over the years. And I've done the same. I wrote down 10. Now, you haven't seen my 10 yet, Reza, have you? But I did look at yours. And interestingly, now we didn't speak about this before. We just wrote down our top 10 separately. You might be surprised to know, Reza, that we have 8 in common.
Wow. Honestly, listeners, I'm just looking at Craig's list right now. 8 in common.
8 in common, wow. Although not necessarily in the same order. Now, did you put your number 1 as the most influential and go down the list or not?
Now, I chose mine as a mixture of cultural importance and musical influence. So, bearing both things in mind, I ordered them. I ordered them according to that. So, somebody might be high on the list because they're culturally very important, or they might be high on the list because they have had a lot of musical influence on other people, although maybe they weren't culturally important, or maybe both. So I tried to do it as best I could with a mixture of those two factors. What about you?
Well, yeah, I did exactly the same, but I was very, very surprised that we had 8 in common, especially because we have different tastes in music. Now, I think we both like jazz, for example, but you tend to favor classical music more than I do. And I like rap music and hip hop music, and you're not very keen on it. So we do have differences in our tastes of music. Nevertheless, we both included 8 of the same artists in our lists.
Yeah. And I'm going to give you a spoiler of mine even before we get started. On mine, and I see also for Craig's as well, in the top 10, you won't find Taylor Swift. We're telling you right now, and we're very sorry to all the Swifties out there, but let us again say why. I'm basing mine, and I think I speak for Craig as well, on cultural importance and musical influence, but I'm talking about in the history of modern America, not just 2025, which is the year we're recording this. So yes, Taylor Swift is immense, is huge in 2025, but it is my honest opinion, sorry, Swifties, that in 10 years, not so many people will be talking about Taylor Swift, but they still will be talking about some of the people on my list. That's what I honestly believe.
Well, that remains to be seen. I mean, in my humble opinion, she has had an incredible impact on modern music, but whether she will stand the test of time, will we be speaking about her 10 years from now, 15 years from now? Who knows? Now let's go to the list, Reza. So why don't you go down your list first, maybe justify your choices, and I have one or two comments to make on your choices.
Well, let me start by saying on second thoughts, maybe I was being a bit too personal when I chose my number one, partly because I really, really like his musical genius. But perhaps, if I'm honest, maybe he hasn't had the most influence, but he's had a lot of influence. My number one is Paul Simon.
I'm curious why you singled out Paul Simon and you didn't write, as I did on my list, Art and Garfunkel.
Oh, because Art Garfunkel, for me, really does not have that much cultural importance or musical influence. Let's be honest. Paul Simon wrote nearly all of the music.
Fair
Most
point.
of it was composed by him.
Fair point.
I don't know exactly what Garfunkel composed, but not an awful lot. Yes, they were a great duo, but afterwards, what did Art Garfunkel do when they broke up? Not a lot, really. But Paul Simon went on for decades being a hugely important artist. You can't really say that of Art Garfunkel, can you?
Fair enough. I'll give you that.
My number two choice is Louis Armstrong. Now, as Craig said, I do like jazz. I love jazz. I listen to a lot of jazz. And Louis Armstrong is definitely not my favorite jazz artist, but I do love a lot of the stuff that he's done. But again, for cultural importance and influence, I think he's huge. He's a titan. He's incredibly big.
He helped to spread jazz in the 1920s, didn't he? Along with Duke Ellington and others.
Yeah, and think of famous jazz artists. Just brainstorm yourself. Think, okay, famous jazz artist. Louis Armstrong immediately pops into your mind, doesn't he? Of course he does. He does.
Otherwise known as Satchmo.
Frank Sinatra. I do like Frank Sinatra. I'm not a huge fan, but he had a great voice, very charismatic, and he definitely deserves to be up there. I mean, in American culture, from really the 50s right up till today, Frank Sinatra's music is always there, if not in the foreground, in the background. He's a huge figure in American culture.
I agree 100%. He's also very, very good to listen to if you want to improve your English, because he pronounces words very clearly. He vocalizes the sounds of English very well. And sometimes singers distort the sounds and the words, so it's difficult to understand what they're saying. Frank Sinatra doesn't. So if you want to listen to music and read the lyrics or understand the lyrics, definitely recommend Frank Sinatra for that.
I think that's probably one of the reasons why he originally became so popular and has remained so, because he's so easy to understand. And you just don't get that from other artists. I'll give you an example. Someone whose music I really like is Tom Waits. But if Frank Sinatra is the king of great diction and pronunciation, because Tom Waits is the opposite. Tom Waits is like, drinking a whiskey. What would they say? Something about whiskey? I didn't hear the rest.
It's really hard to understand Tom Waits because most of the time he's drunk.
Yeah. Of course, you've got to have up there, I believe, Aretha Franklin, who died not so long ago, not so many years ago, 4 or 5 years ago.
Queen of Soul.
Queen of Soul, come on, Queen of Soul. She's my top female figure. I've got some others, but I'm putting my first woman there at number 4, Aretha Franklin, because she's also had a huge impact. My next star in the Hall of Fame, legendary musician, is Jimi Hendrix. I do think he's had a huge influence. It's probably partly personal as well. In my view, not many people have ever played the guitar like him. I do like a really good over-the-top electric guitar solo. And to combine that into a kind of rock song that that everybody can also enjoy. That's not easy, but Jimi Hendrix managed to combine the really over-the-top, strong, bluesy, funky guitar solo, and he got it into a song. That wasn't easy, and he managed to do that.
A music critic famously said that Jimi Hendrix didn't play the guitar, he raped it.
Yeah.
Because of the way he changed the sound and made it so psychedelic.
And all those strange effects, which are so commonplace now, he was the first guy to really be doing it that we know of, like kind of, like using his teeth and all sorts of funny things and doing strange things with his hands and retuning the pegs and all that. Nobody had really done that before, and he just never put a finger out of place. And it was like the guitar was part of him. Like it was like an extension of his body, and all great guitarists, any guitarist who's worth anything since Jimi Hendrix always pays homage to him because they know that like he'll always be the king of all guitarists. Next on my list, of course he's got to be there, is Elvis Presley. How can Elvis not be there?
The king of rock and roll.
King of rock and roll. And maybe he deserves that title, but we'll talk about that in a minute. He certainly didn't invent rock and roll, and he's by no means the first famous rock and roller, but boy, he's probably the most famous. However, in my view, there are guys who did it better than him. We'll talk about that later. But to my mind, yes, he is the most important, although not the best. Number 7 for me is Michael Jackson. How could you not have Michael Jackson there?
Despite the controversy that clouded his later years and rumors of him being a pedophile, you still put him in the list?
Yeah, because we're not talking about their personal lives. We're not talking about the good and the bad side of their character.
Their contribution to music.
When it comes to music, come on. I mean, Michael Jackson, he has to be there. He's influenced everyone since certainly the 80s, if not even before, in the 70s when he was with the Jackson 5. But I'm afraid they don't get on my list. Although they were all huge in their day, all the Jackson brothers and sisters, Michael is in a league of his own. I even forgive him for wearing incredibly expensive, really glamorous suits with white socks. Turns out he was ahead of his time because now, of course, it's cool to wear white socks.
That's right.
But for a while, he was not cool, and he was still determined to do it for 30 years, his trademark white socks, So my next figure is Stevie Wonder. How could you not have Stevie there? I am a big fan of his music, but I also think he's been very influential. He managed to get a lot of funkiness into pop songs without being like pure funky. He kept it pop, but he made it funky. He made pop funky. He did that. He managed to get just the right mix to make things really snappy and funky, but still keep them popular, keep them commercial, easy to remember, great lyrics, and his whole persona, the blind guy who's got music like in the blood, and he's just really into it. I mean, he made that a really great part of his persona. Quite commercial, yeah, but a very gifted musician. And from him, I go to number 9, the other extreme. Someone who didn't really care, I guess, about image much at all, was Jim Morrison. Take it or leave it. If you like him and you're into him, you maybe even think he's a cult figure, great. If not, I'm sure he couldn't give a damn. That's Jim Morrison for you. Although The Doors were a great commercial success in the end, you always get the feeling that he didn't really care if they were or not. Great, and he was more than happy to spend the money, a lot of it on alcohol and drugs and other crazy things, but he wouldn't really have cared if they hadn't been megastars. His words, his lyrics are deep, they're dark, they're mysterious, they're kind of mystical. They're out there. I mean, he did like that kind of 60s, 70s weird psychedelic stuff really well, and yet somehow commercialized it. There are other people doing that, but a lot of them are long forgotten or not half as influential. But everybody knows The Doors. He made weird psychedelic mainstream. So he's got to be up there. And then number 10 is someone who also has to be in my list. Maybe he should be higher. I don't know, but at least he's there. My last choice is Bob Dylan.
Bob Dylan, the hippie poet.
Hippie poet, the guy who, in a way, he was groundbreaking for me. But in another way, all he really did was popularized the typical songs of American folk artists. I mean, he admitted that. He kind of took their lyrics, changed them. Sometimes he made up his own stuff and kind of made a more modern version of that in the 60s. But his heroes were people like Woody Guthrie and things like that. They're the guys he looked up to.
He was a protest singer, wasn't he, Woody Guthrie?
Yes, and that's where Dylan kind of got his inspiration, and he kind of mixed the hippie element to it, let's say. So Bob Dylan has to be there. Although I'll be honest, I'm not a huge fan of him musically. His music doesn't move me a lot, but I think some of his lyrics are really potent, and culturally he's been hugely successful. So that's my top 10. However, it's really hard just to bring this down to 10 people. So Craig has given me the chance to also give some honorary mentions, people who are really important, but the list isn't big enough to have them there. I would definitely mention Chuck Berry, the guy who really is probably the first rock and roller before Elvis.
From the 1950s, yeah? Rhythm and blues, R&B.
A lot of people say it, and there's a lot of evidence to support them, that basically Elvis was kind of a white version of Chuck Berry.
And Little Richard.
And Little Richard, he's on my list as well. But Chuck Berry was the first guy to do it, probably. But let's be honest, it's as simple as this. A lot of audiences wouldn't have followed a black guy doing it in the 1950s, but they would follow Elvis doing it. So along came Elvis. Little Richard, brilliant. What a character. What a performer. Really over the top. Lucy,
what does over the...
Who got his mother?
What does that was quite a shock, you singing there. What does over the top mean? You said
OTT, over the top, is something's really exaggerated, perhaps too exaggerated.
Extravagant
in every way. He was extravagant. I mean, I think he was the first famous guy to start like putting his foot up on the piano and playing with that. So he'd be playing with the two hands, stick one of his legs up on the piano, start playing with that. But apart from being a showman, he could play. He had talent. So yeah, he was an outrageous showman, but he had the talent to back it up. James Brown also gets an honorable mention, of course. Sex Machine, Get Up On Up, etc. Ray Charles, who was doing the cool, funky, soul-y black guy before Stevie Wonder. Dolly Parton's on my list, Craig. Are you surprised of honorary mentions?
Not at all. She's on my list too.
Right, Dolly Parton, because I had to think, okay, Reza, it's not all about you, it's about influence. You can't ignore country and Western music, the huge influence in America. Dolly Parton's the queen of country and music Western. Also, I love her personality. I think she's a fantastic person.
And a wonderful businesswoman.
A great businesswoman, very nice, great to her local community. She's a great person as well. Janis Joplin, the hippie queen. There's been a lot of hippie queens, but she's like the queen of queens. Johnny Cash, also for country and Western, but also he was good for the crossover, country and Western rock. And last on my list, Kurt Cobain. I'm a fan, but not a huge fan, but he meant a lot to a hell of a lot of people. He kind of made grunge, garagey, grungy, grey, depressing sound.
Nirvana.
Nirvana, yeah.
Nirvana.
So they are my honorable mentions.
Let's take a quick break here, because I know you listen to this podcast to take your English to the next level. But what about your speaking? Is your fluency improving? Are you happy with your speaking skills? My conversation course focuses on making you a more confident and more fluent English speaker. You'll join me and a small group of motivated students, and we'll meet on Zoom and have topical discussions, role plays, debates, and presentations that will expand your vocabulary and help you express yourself effectively in English. So be proactive and take the first step towards becoming a confident and fluent English speaker. Send me an email today to craig@inglespodcast.com and I'll send you details of the next online conversation course. Thanks for listening. Now let's get back to the podcast. Well, I've got a similar list, and I'll tell you that in a second. But just before that, I was reading a little bit about the history of US music, and it goes right back probably to the native Indians. Before the European settlers arrived in the US, of course, they had their own music. And then when the Europeans came to live in the US, they brought with them folk music from Europe, and also religious hymns that started to spread across the US. And then we had the African slaves, a very dark period of American history, but they did bring with them working songs as they were working on the railway lines, etc., very spiritual singing, blues and gospel music at the beginning of the 1900s. And then jazz music, as Reza mentioned before, born in New Orleans, wasn't it, Reza? Jazz music. Yeah.
Definitely. Where Louis Armstrong came from. New Orleans, home of jazz.
The home of jazz. And then we had swing, famously led by Benny Goodman, Count Basie, and others. And then, as Reza mentioned, the birth of rock and roll with Little Richard, Chuck Berry, Elvis Presley in the 1950s. Of course, in the 60s, what happened? There was the British invasion, brought over the Beatles, the Rolling Stones, influence from the UK over into American music. Around about the same time, we had in Detroit Motown music, soul music. Motown meaning Motor City because it originated in Detroit. And Reza's already mentioned Ray Charles. I think we can probably include Bob Dylan in that period of the 60s. And then, of course, Jimi Hendrix with psychedelic rock. You could probably include the Doors in that period of psychedelic rock and a kind of a counterculture movement against the Vietnam War. And then in the 1970s, moving to the 1970s, we had the rise of funk music, artists like James Brown that Reza mentioned. And then, of course, that led to disco, Donna Summer, the Bee Gees. Moving on to the 80s, the pop culture, hip hop and rap started in the 80s, the birth of MTV, music television, and then Michael Jackson with his White Sox, Madonna, Prince, those kind of artists. And then in the same period of the 80s, heavy metal, also influenced by the UK, and glam rock, groups like Kiss, for example. And Kurt Cobain, grunge, Nirvana, Pearl Jam, those bands started in the 90s. And we also got more mainstream hip hop. And then Whitney Houston, Lauryn Hill, also towards the end of the 90s. So that's a very condensed, brief history of, I think, what happened in the US. Do you want to add anything, Reza? Anything I've forgotten?
No, I think that was a really good, what we would call potted history. So, like, imagine all the history, a long history, all put in a pot, but you got everything in there. Yeah.
Okay.
And funny, you mentioned something about starting off with the Native Americans, but then the extremely important influence of Afro-American culture on all types of popular music, starting up from blues, but right through to now. And while you did that, I started looking at my list. I hadn't thought about it before, but I checked it. And I'm very pleased. Smug, actually, would be the word. S-M-U-G, smug. That means I'm in a very big-headed way pleased to see that by chance, I hadn't planned it. My list is 5 black, 5 white artists. So there's pretty good mixture.
Oh, very, very culturally correct. Well done.
I didn't plan it, but it is. I've just noticed. 5 black, 5 white. And I think that pretty much sums up American music.
The liberal left will be very happy with you. So, as mentioned before, my list of the top 10, very similar to Reza's. I put Elvis Presley as number 1. I think, as far as I'm concerned, he's probably the most influential, partly because of what Reza said, that he made mainstream the music of black artists like Little Richard, Chuck Berry. He brought it to more of a wider audience and made it more popular. I put Bob Dylan as number 2. I don't like Bob Dylan very much, but I do recognize his influence. The poet, fantastic lyrics, but I can't stand his voice. For me, it's like nails on a chalkboard. I just can't stand his squeaky little voice, but I do recognize that he's very influential.
I totally agree. I don't like his voice either myself.
Michael Jackson, number 3. I agree with Reza 100%. And Bruce Springsteen, number 4. I've got Prince at number 5. And Aretha Franklin at number 6, the Queen of Soul. I agree 100% with Reza. For me, Jimi Hendrix, incredible influence on psychedelic rock and guitar music. And instead of Jim Morrison, I've just put The Doors because I didn't really want to separate Jim Morrison from the band. So it's more or less the same, isn't it? Jim Morrison, The Doors. Stevie Wonder at number 9, although the way I see it, his early music was his best music. I didn't really like his transition to pop, but I do really like his earlier music, albums like Inner Visions, really soulful, and I think they speak more to me than his later stuff. And number 10, Simon and Garfunkel.
You're keeping Garfunkel.
Keeping them together, yeah, because I grew up listening to them back in the 80s, and I do agree that Paul Simon is probably the more talented of the pair. But yeah, I kept them together, Simon and Garfunkel. And I'll quickly run through my honorary mentions. Frank Sinatra, Lady Gaga, Taylor Swift, Dolly Parton, the lovely Dolly, the Eagles, the Foo Fighters, very American band, and then some heavy rockers, Bon Jovi, Van Halen, Aerosmith. Not my cup of tea, but they have had a huge influence on American music. The Beach Boys, wonderful studio band, creating fantastic revolutionary music back in the 60s. Chuck Berry, Madonna, Nirvana, Guns N' Roses, The Grateful Dead. Shout out to all deadheads out there. Johnny Cash, Red Hot Chili Peppers, Tom Petty and the Heartbreakers, Creedence Clearwater Revival. The Velvet Underground was Lou Reed's band. And the Ramones from the punk era, who are interestingly playing in Benidorm within the next month or two. So if you want tickets to see the Ramones, go on the internet and you can go and see them live in Benidorm in Spain.
Now, Craig, I've just realized that on my list, in fact, I could refer to your list as well. Yep, in your list, there's one and only one artist that I've seen live. Who is it?
From my list or your list?
Whichever you prefer.
So it's one that's on both. I would guess it's Paul Simon.
No, it's Bruce Springsteen.
I've seen him live too.
Ah, something we have in common.
Yeah, we have that in common. He was very good.
Where did you see him?
I saw him with Sting in Madison Square Garden in New York.
Wow. That's you've trumped me there. That's more impressive than mine. Mine was in the Levante Stadium in Valencia.
Right.
When he played here. But what the most enjoyment I got out of the concert was just knowing that it was free. I got a free ticket. Someone at the last minute I knew was ill and couldn't go. I was like, do you want 2 tickets to the Bruce Springsteen concert? It's like, I'd love to go, mate, but I haven't got 80 euros to give you. It's like, no, I'll give you it free. It's like, yes, I'll take that. 2 tickets, 80 euros each. I'll go to that. Thanks very much.
And did you enjoy the concert?
Yeah, it was great. Really, he's a great live performer.
He is good. But now it's your turn to practice your English. Would you include any artists or bands that are not in our top 10? And who are your favourite American bands and artists? We'd be very interested to hear, especially if you feel that we haven't included your favourites in our lists. You can send us a voice message by going to speakpipe.com. That's speakpipe.com/Ingles podcast. Emails, Reza?
If you'd prefer to write, you could email craig@inglespodcast.com or me at this address, belfastreza@gmail.com.
And we remind you that if you are a Spanish speaker and you want to improve your English online with free and paid resources, you can visit the Mansion Inglés website at mansioningles.com. And for paid products, you can browse the online store at store.mansioningles.net.
As always, a huge thank you to our Patreon supporters. That's Patreon. And those people who've joined the program, they support us by making a donation. And as a way of saying thank you for their donation, we give them access to audio transcriptions of every podcast. And also, as an added extra bonus, recently Craig has started doing live Zoom chats with anybody from the program who's free and wishes to take advantage of that, so you can practice your speaking. If you're interested in being a sponsor, have a look at the link in the show notes. It's patreon.com/Ingles podcast.
Unfortunately, we don't have time to mention all of our lovely Patreon supporters who have joined, but we will say hello and welcome to our latest supporters, and they are Michaela Stramtu, Isabel M, Amparo, Jader Cortez, and Adrian. Thank you to you and to everybody who is supporting the podcast on Patreon. What's next week, Reza?
Next week is something which is very closely related to male rock legends: beards, mustaches, and facial hair.
So join us next week for a very hairy episode of the podcast. Until then, have a lovely week. Thank you for listening this week. It's goodbye from Reza.
And it's bye-bye from Craig.
If you enjoyed this podcast, please mention it to one of your friends so that more people can listen. And the music this week was by Hits. The track is called See You Later.